I asked this in Ask Men and also in Ask Women Over 30 to try to get both sides, since I've seen it come up a lot in other places. This blew up more than expected, and both sides have presented good arguments for and against, I think. Thanks everyone for participating. Story 1. I would support it as long as the results, pass or fail, are stored and not the actual DNA from the father and child. There absolutely should not be a government registry of DNA information for citizens unless you are convicted of a felony. Story 2. I'm a child who knows who my biological dad is. My mom is pretty sure it's him, but they originally split because someone told my dad that my mom cheated. She swears she didn't. Either way, the only reason I actually care is because of my genetics. My grandmother on my biological dad's side died of 3 cancers. My aunt on that side just went into remission for colon cancer. For me, a paternity test ensures I know my genetic predispositions. Maybe someone can chime in, but I feel if they were mandatory for that reason, what are people going to say about actual paternity? It's for the health of your child, not because someone's immoral or whatnot. Someone mentioned opting in and out. That could be far more feasible. Story 3. I am not sure. For one thing, it amounts to an invasion of privacy and a legally forced medical exam. I am someone who supports bodily autonomy. On the other hand, it would certainly resolve a large number of false paternity claims and expose people who cheat. I think a better solution is to mandate it only when requested in a legal dispute. So if a woman is insisting I am the father, I have the right to require a test, and she would be legally obligated to have the test conducted or forfeit any benefits. Innocent until proven guilty. Story 4. I'm on board with it. The woman is guaranteed parentage of the child since the child quite literally comes out of her body. If the man asks for paternity testing at birth, he risks offending his partner who may believe that he does not trust her, which is a weak starting point for any relationship. However, if the testing is required by law, he doesn't offend her, and they both know the parentage of the child. Win-win. Story 5. I'm curious to know if all the men who are saying this should be the law, and women for that matter, are you also okay with the government having access to every adult's DNA so that if the test shows the person isn't the father, they can find out who the actual father is and make him take accountability for his actions and be responsible for his child? Because surely that's got to be part of it if we go down this track. Story 6. I'm a woman, and I'm not opposed to it for the purposes of determining paternity. Although there are other concerns about the access and sharing of DNA and it possibly being used for other reasons, which I'm not addressing in this comment. I know a girl who had a one-night stand with a guy. She got pregnant. She told him and he agreed to co-parent with her, and so his name was on the birth certificate. My sister married this guy a few years later. Fast forward, and the kid is 17, and my sister is doing some ancestry research. They give the kid a DNA test, and it turns out that the guy he thought was his father his entire life is not actually his father. That's also an entire childhood of the wrong guy paying child support payments, the wrong guy sharing custody and raising the child. It's unfair to the child that he was deprived of knowing who his real father was because some girl had one-night stands with several guys and picked one of them to be the dad without knowing for sure. Story 7. I don't like mandated anything, but the concept in general is fine. If hospitals did it by default but made it optional, sure. I do think paternity fraud should have actual punishments that matter. Story 8. Should be standard procedure combined with testing for genetic diseases unless the couple opts out. Including the genetic disease testing should avoid guys being pressured to opt out by accusations of not trusting their wife. It should be mandatory for child support cases before any payments are made. Story 9. Absolutely. If positive, that's business as usual. If negative, the guy should be able to opt out. I'd love to see the legitimate opposition to this. Just did a quick search and found this. About 32% of men who take a paternity test are not the biological father. However, this is only for men who have a reason to take a test, not all men. About a third of men who suspect they may not be the father were correct, which doesn't count men who trust their partner for better or for worse. That is concerning enough to seriously consider mandatory paternity testing. The only reason why women would be widely opposed to this would be because many would be proven to be cheaters and they know it. Of course, not all women do that, but enough do as mentioned above. Story 10. If the parents separate, then a DNA test should be mandatory before financial support is provided by instruction. However, that doesn't mean it can't be voluntary. Story 11. Tough one. Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. I have debated it personally after I filed for divorce, but I love my kids too much to risk it. Story 12. I don't like the idea of it being outright mandatory because I don't want my DNA being handed over to what will ultimately be a government contractor. I think it should be completely acceptable to contest the paternity in cases of divorce or separation if it's relevant. Story 13. I'm against more government mandates for everyone without knowing the amount of people who actually need the test. If it's government mandated, taxpayers are paying for these tests, and it's someone else's problem. Story 14. Mandated feels kind of heavy-handed and puts a bad feeling in my gut, considering how mandates are often used with respect to women. I think that men should want and seek paternity tests for their potential children, but getting the government involved seems weird to me. Story 15. On the surface, this idea sounds good. My problem with it is the government seizing your DNA without you having done anything wrong and without a warrant. If this is something you want to do, access to testing should be readily available, and once test results are concluded, all DNA samples and computer data should be erased. Story 16. It seems weird. It comes with the unspoken implication that this is a significant enough problem that addressing it was necessary, when I don't think there's any evidence to support that. Besides that, I'm not interested in a doctor taking a DNA swab or whatever they'd need to do right after the child is born, whether they are my biological child or not. Story 17. I think yes, for a lot of the reasons mentioned, but that can't be the only step in the process. How early can a DNA test be done? Let's mandate it happen as early as possible. Pregnancy itself is a handful for a family, financially, emotionally, and physically. Allow for abortion at any time. If we're going to be putting some children into a situation we know is bad for them, let's allow the woman to have the choice to avoid putting a child in that bad position. Maybe, let's actually have more men's DNA on file, so we can find the real father who was part of infidelity and should be accountable for taking care of their child in the event that abortion isn't an option or the woman wants to keep the child. Expand the welfare state in the event that no one wants to have their DNA in a database for this cause and we want to give the child a better chance at having a good life, given they're in a single-parent home and the data on those outcomes aren't great. Either raise taxes or cut something in the state or federal budget because someone needs to pay for the administration and analysis of the tests, collecting DNA, safeguarding the DNA database, and expanding the welfare state to take care of children. Story 18. I think it should be required before a father is put onto a birth certificate. Studies show that fathers struggle early on because their parentage is the only one that can be questioned. I think legally it should be required that a father named on a birth certificate has some sort of proof. I'd also recommend doing 2 tests, or at least notifying parents that there are false negatives, so if results are shocking, then seek a second test. Story 19. Traveling men would be more careful. Rock stars and others. Furthermore, child support should be paid by the biological father. The divorce rate would probably increase for a while. There would be less accidental inbreeding. That happens. This would expose pedophiles and incest. I haven't considered it much. I am a woman, by the way. Edit. To know the ancestry, biology, and future health concerns for the child. Story 20. No, we have way too much policing in our society as it is, both legally and socially. Let people who want to know, but I do not think we should get the government involved in that. If you want, you can let the father request one without the mother, but otherwise, it feels like gross overreach to demand everyone to comply. Story 21. In this discussion, men who are not fathers, people unaware of the lasting legacy of eugenics, people whose existence has never been threatened by the government or hate groups, and people who aren't aware of the role hospitals have played in the genocide of indigenous people are present. This is just a collection of misguided opinions. There are ways to handle child support that don't involve creating DNA databases of everyone. Let's save money and have the government provide direct financial support. Our tax dollars already cover court costs for custody disputes. Wouldn't it be better to fund child support directly? Story 22. Every birth? No. If someone wants to do it, not necessarily the alleged father. Yes, I'm baffled that my country, France, allows adultery but forbids paternity tests because it will break families. Like, what the heck? Story 23. Speaking from experience, I wish this had been mandatory when my sister had her baby. Her ex contested paternity for 2 years, dragging everyone through emotional hell and expensive court battles. A simple test at birth would have prevented all that drama. Story 24. It is a ridiculous solution to a problem that already has a solution. If you are that concerned about paternity, get a test. You can already do that. Mandating paternity tests does not solve any problem with paternity testing and, in fact, guarantees that testing will get worse since we are not equipped to handle 10,000 new DNA tests per day, the logistics of ensuring the validity of all those tests, and the edge cases like DNA chimerism. Story 25. Mandated by law? No way. Mandating that the government have all babies have their DNA tested at birth is a violation of personal rights. Determining paternity would just be the cover story to build a database of all citizens' DNA. For fathers who are suspicious enough to go through the trouble of paying for and getting a paternity test, 70% of them are still the father in the end. Story 26. I think it's gross and insulting to mandate a paternity test from a parent who is willingly accepting the responsibility of being a parent. I would have aggressively refused if they asked me to do this while my children were being born. And then what would the punishment have been for me refusing this mandate? This is a stupid idea. It reeks of, if you did nothing wrong, you shouldn't care when we take your privacy away. Story 27. Imagine the change in behavior if people knew for a fact that they would have to be accountable for a child. A woman would never be able to deceive the man she cheated on, and a man would not be able to deny responsibility for a child he helped create. Win-win for society. Story 28. I think it should be mandatory before a birth certificate is signed. However, the idea of the government having everyone's DNA is terrifying to me. So, if it's done, it should be done at the local level at the hospital. Then the results should be destroyed. It should be a federal crime for the hospitals to mismanage or sell the genetic information. Story 29. In principle, I agree that everyone should know whether their child is theirs and make an informed choice about whether they still want to raise it if not. But there are a few things I would want ironed out first. 1. If a woman or baby is in danger of harm or homelessness as a result, there needs to be some kind of safety scheme in place. In countries where abortion after rape is illegal, will they support the male partner if he takes on a father's role? Will the mother be forced to give visitation to her rapist? Do you really want the government having a DNA database? Story 30. I am against it because this typically means someone has to have their income tax to pay for it when you could easily pay for one yourself. Like, why should money be taken from me to find out that your girl is for the streets? Story 31. I like the idea of optional. If either party is in doubt, or for instance, you want to ensure you were given the correct donor sperm, it's not a terrible idea. Imagine there will be plenty of marriages that end with a child's birth. Story 32. I'm for it, for health reasons. I know my dad's side has a history of diabetes and heart disease, so I've been careful in watching my weight and fitness in my adult life. It's useful if the kid ever decides to dig into his genealogy. It's handy in inheritance cases. It's way more than just proving mom is a whore. Story 33. I think anytime a support agreement is being put in place, parentage needs to be unequivocally established. I think anytime in vitro fertilization is being used, parentage needs to be established at birth. Story 34. Bloke's opinion. I agree with this concept for a few reasons. 1. Hereditary diseases. If you know who your biological parents are, you know your risk, helping to hopefully reduce or manage it. Cheating has been more easily enabled by the multitude of casual hookup applications and websites, enabling higher rates of casual sex. The reality is that rates of unprotected sex are on the increase too. Normalizing testing is not an erosion of anyone's rights, male or female, and would severely blunt or destroy one of the hook points used by people like Andrew Tate. Story 35. I never thought of this, but yes, it needs to be mandatory. There's no downside to it at all. It would expose cheating individuals, ensure the father is comfortable and knows the truth, and bring both parents closer together. It would be like an ultimate moment of trust. Yes, this child is really yours. I wasn't unfaithful to you, at least with a child. Story 36. I'm generally against mandating any health procedure unless it affects someone else, like vaccines. However, I believe a man always has the right to request one regardless of what the mother says. And that is just for the obvious child support reasons. Story 37. I believe that every child born in every hospital should have paternity tests for mother and father as they are leaving the hospital. I know the rare switched at birth situation isn't something that they worry about, but everyone's issues would be covered and they would know 100% for sure whose names to put on the birth certificate. Story 38. Only if wanted by the man, but at any time further down the track when a legal consequence is about to be imposed on the man, such as child support, he should obviously have a right to confirm it is his legal responsibility.